I would say I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying about the fear aspect, and the wheels have been turning in my head because it's making me ask myself, am I afraid of relying and depending on someone?
Mm.
And I don't necessarily have an answer to the question of whether or not it's fear, but I do know that I experience a lot of discomfort. Yeah, I would say I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying about the fear aspect, and the wheels have been turning in my head because it's making me ask myself, am I afraid of relying and depending on someone?
Mm.
And I don't necessarily have an answer to the question of whether or not it's fear, but I do know that I experience a lot of discomfort when I find myself being reliant on someone or expecting things from someone,
Mm.
or even having them expect things from me in the sense of I do give 110, 150%. And I put this pressure on myself to like always be there, always be on, like be the strong one, be the reliable one,
Mm-hmm.
be the person who doesn't necessarily need others, but is the one that is needed. And so I feel like for me, I've definitely found just a discomfort when the rare occasion that I have found myself speaking or dating someone who is able to show up for me to the same level that I'm able to show up for them, I find it very uncomfortable. It's like this weird
Mm.
kind of like I don't have the control or the power in the dynamic because we're kind of equals to each other.
Mm.
Whereas when I've been with people who are emotionally unavailable, that feels more comfortable to me because there's no real intimacy there and I can kind of just walk at any moment. It's not going to be that big of a deal and not going to make that big of a difference in my life. So I guess ultimately it does come down to kind of fear, but
Mm-hmm.
for me it doesn't register as fear. It's just this sense of discomfort. Like I just feel
Sure.
really uncomfortable and anxious,
Yeah.
and then,
No.
and that's like part of the reason that I have, like I described, purposely been single because I just realized this pattern in my life where I was pursuing things that from the beginning were never going to work, and it's because that was
Right.
comfortable for me. It doesn't require like real intimacy or real sacrifice. It's just kind of
Right there.
just distraction.
No, I know absolutely, man. Again, you dropping so many gems right now, Shelby. No, that last part, that's so profound. What you just, I don't know if you fully grasp what you just said. To me, that is so profound. You said, yeah. So I'm seeking out people who are emotionally unavailable. I could tell you from like an emotional aspect, the way I interpret that is I'm purposely seeking out people who are unavailable because that allows me to protect myself. It allows me to stay insulated. It allows me to keep my wall up, right? So then if that's true, I'm not you, so I'm not going to assume. If that was true, then I would ask why perhaps do I need to be so guarded when it
Mhm.
comes to dating?
Yeah, I would say I feel like it directly comes back to just my experience growing up with my parents. I mean, like I've described them, I have such loving relationships with my parents and never ever doubted that I was loved and cherished and cared
Hmm.
for. They always made that clear, especially with their words.
Yeah.
But oftentimes their actions left me kind of on my own. My parents, in particular, when there was difficulty in their relationship,
Hmm.
they were not nearly as hands on with my sister and me. So my parents themselves had kind of an on again, off again relationship. It was strained with a lot of difficulty and mistrust.
Mm.
Fortunately, my parents they were always very loving with each other, and when they would argue and fight, there was never any kind of name calling, for example, or
Sure.
anything close to like violence or anything like that. It was never anything like that. But they just did have such a strained on again, off again relationship with each other that had a direct impact on the relationship they had with me and my sister. Like when they were together and happy, then we had very happy, engaged parents. And when they were separated
Sure.
and fighting with each other, then, my sister and I were kind of on our own to care for ourselves and figure things out. And, having the needs that any child had, there would be a reaction that we were a burden, or at least that's how it came across to the two.
Mm.
Um,
Okay.
so I
Okay.
think for me in particular, my issue is just that I I feel like I have disorganized attachment in the sense of I'm just, yeah, it was just so like up and down with my parents and kind of unpredictable. The only thing that was predictable with the two of them was that they were going to be unpredictable. Like,
Mm,
I would never know if I was going to come home from school and like all my dad's stuff is packed because he's moving out. And then sometimes he would actually move out, or he would unpack it and he would stay and they'd work it out. It was just a lot of I feel like my world as a child revolved around my parents' strained dysfunctional relationship. And so
yes.
as a result, as
Okay.
an adult, I am just very, I don't know. It's hard to describe. I guess I would say I'm like kind of hot and cold with people, where it's like I want to connect with them, but I don't at the same time. It's like I
No,
want,
no,
and then when I start almost getting there, I'm like, never mind, never mind. This is too
no.
much.
It listen, listen. I'm digesting everything you just said. Okay, let me make a point real quick, and then I'm gonna address what you said because it's burning in my tongue. I have to say it about what you just mentioned. So I believe so much in that our family environment and our lived experiences growing up really define the way that we see the world. It really shapes our perception for a very, very, very long time. Just want to make that point. So, what did Shelby just say? You said, I tend to seek out people who are emotionally unavailable and it's easy to walk away from. Then you just gave us, and I really appreciate it, a lot of good background about the way your parents' relationship was, what that dynamic was like at times, which sounded a bit chaotic, a bit emotionally unstable. And then we are, as children, we're witnessing that, right? We're observing all of that. What do you think is happening at that time? I'm formulating concrete opinions about how relationships look, even if I don't like it. It's becoming normalized to me. Do you think that there's a connection? I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think there's a connection between witnessing all of that as a young woman and the type of men that you've sought out and the type of relationships that you've had, situationships that you call them?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. I feel like the connection is just, it's the most obvious thing to me in my life. Like I feel like I've always been able to, or not always, but once I just hit a certain level of maturity, like I said, around 22, 23, it started clicking for me like, oh yeah, no, mom and dad, because I would laugh all the time in college. I would laugh to myself like, I'm surprised I don't have more issues, lol. And it wasn't until I hit that like kind of a little bit of a stride in the adult world that I was able to understand, like, growing up with watching having such dysfunction modeled for me, that
Mm-hmm.
is directly correlated with the dysfunction in my own life now, my own friendships, my own romantic relationships, even issues I have at work. I feel like are directly connected to just the dynamic with my parents. And I think too, for in my case in particular, just growing up with parents who didn't fit any kind of traditional roles or mold for the most part, including, not only in terms of gender, but also being an interracial couple in the deep
Right, right.
South of Mississippi. Like my parents just defied all kinds of, they really were just in a league of their own in terms of their relationship and their dynamic with each other. And so for me,
Yeah.
it's I haven't seen something comparable to that. Like I meet my friends' parents and they're totally different from my parents, and I just see how my
Yeah.
friends handle relationships and their friendships and things of that nature, and it's totally different from me.
Yeah.
So, and I hope I don't. Sometimes I wonder too. I'm like, am I just like, oh, I'm so different? Like, I don't know. It's like,
No, 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 no. No, let's no. We can definitely speak to that. Are you different? Yes, you are. We all are unique in our own ways. But the reason why I can point some of these things out and I can understand is because there's a lot more things that we have in common than we really think we do. I'm gonna give you an example. So you were talking about, I'm thinking, oh man, how come I didn't have more issues? I saw so much. There was a lot of dysfunction, right? I would make the point to you that every family has a certain level of dysfunction because every family is unique. And there's things that we see that we believe are normal because that's all we know until you meet somebody else or you're around other people that challenge that type of thinking, right? I give you a perfect example, and then I'll give you one from me. I was doing an interview with this guy, and he was talking about how he didn't realize until he got to college, for example, he's Dominican. He didn't realize that until he got to college that he grew up poor. because he grew up in Dominican Republic and in New Jersey, and that for the most part, everybody around him grew up in similar circumstances, so you didn't really recognize any difference. But then when he went away to college, he started to deal with shame and embarrassment because he recognized that he didn't have the people that he was in school with didn't have a lot of the same experiences that he did, right? So that's him. For me, I had to learn how to, as an example, as I've talked about this before, decouple love with abuse. Because in my family, with my experience with my father, I always thought that those two came together because that's the only time like I heard him tell me that. So I allowed myself to be in relationship with somebody who behaved similarly because that's what I thought. Again, our environment shapes our perception until it gets challenged. And I'm saying that to you because you're making it very clear that what you experienced growing up and you recognize that has influenced to a certain degree the type of men that you've gone for, maybe even some of your career choices or the way you've dealt with colleagues at work.